It's that, yeah. So thank you so much for the nice introduction. I'm really excited about this. So Marion Riemann, I'm from Germany, actually raised in Hamburg, Germany, and just when COVID hit on March 13th, I decided to move here to be with my now husband Paul. I learned about the borders closing the day before and I disrupted my life big time, and here I am rebuilding my business and reinventing myself. This is my passion, what I will be sharing with you today. I'm really passionate about how do our minds grow? How do we adapt to this crazy world? You know, that COVID is just, I think, the tip of the iceberg, and it's a harbinger of more to come. And so I'm going to dive into, you said it, Deborah, I have tons to cover on the one hand, and on the other hand, really, there are a couple of times where I will invite you to reflect and chat and come up with hopefully some insights and takeaways from this. So feel free also either to put something in the chat, a question. Deborah, she will be looking at those and interrupting me if that's helpful, and if we can make the time, or just interrupt me. I mean, I'm fine with that too. I mean, that's volatile, and that's actually what I'm talking about today. And so please feel free. This is also a co-creation. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you and hope that everybody can see. So this is what I will be talking about, VUCA and how to boost your leadership effectiveness. And just going over a couple of points, what I'm intending to cover today is what is VUCA, and I'd love to hear from some of you whether you've heard about the concept and what is behind this acronym. What is this gap that I'm talking about between the mindsets and the challenges that we're actually facing? What's that distinction between complicated and complex problems? And what does that have to do with leadership effectiveness? I would like to introduce to you to something that is very powerful, one of the most powerful pieces of information that leaders need today. And I would like for you to also look at Erica, a small business case, to make it more real and give it some flesh. And then I want to prove to you with yet more data why women are more effective leaders, especially in the face of complexity. And then I have a special offer. So I really hope that you stay with me and us until the end, because I really would like to help you boost your leadership effectiveness. So, and I'm actually going to go with a pretty dynamic pace, as you can already tell, just because I really want to share. But if you feel like, oh, Marion, please slow down, then also just feel free to let me know, put a note into the chat. Okay, so what is, yes?
Oh, if everyone could be on mute too, just in case.
Yes.
That way we don't speak over each other.
Thank you. So I want to speak a little bit about this concept of VUCA, to frame the topic, to get us all into the mood here and into the context. So VUCA is this acronym that was actually coined in the US military in the 1990s when they realized that their enemies had changed dramatically, like global terrorism, for example. And so they coined this acronym, which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And since then, so it's been quite a while since the 90s, since then, the business world has taken it on as well, because business people have realized this is not just happening in the military context, this is happening in the business world as well. And so I just want to go through a little bit, to give you a flavor of what we mean by these four concepts. Volatility. So it really, that speaks to the rapid pace of change that you have been noticing, I'm sure, when you look at your everyday challenges in business. And we now actually have statistics that show us that the amount of information, and get this, really, this is something to let sink in, the amount of information that we have available on this planet through internet and so forth doubles every 12 hours. Every 12 hours. And just to put that into perspective, looking back into our history, by the end of World War II, knowledge was doubling every 25 years. So what does that mean for evolution of mankind and also our minds and the function of our brains? I will go into that later. And so because things are changing so much, we're dealing with a heck of a load of uncertainty. And we tend to feel uncertain because our brain is wired to do a certain thing, which is to look for, predicting factors, and we often go to the past and to experience and expertise, but we cannot use our past as the predictor anymore in the face of complexity. That is something that we know, and I will speak about that more later. So we look for cause and effect relationships. Again, that's what our brain is wired to doing. And because we can't find them in the face of complexity, this is the cause for this outcome and so forth, then this is what we feel as complex and overwhelming, and what Robert Keegan calls us being in over our heads. And then fourth, with complexity, we find so-called unknown unknowns. So there isn't a solution to be found. There is not one thing that is the right answer to the complex challenge that you're facing. So we keep asking ourselves, what's actually happening? What is actually the fundamental nature of the challenge and the problem that I'm facing? Unknown unknowns. Okay, so the question is, why is it that we are, well-trained, fairly intelligent and successful, and we're really, really struggling with VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity? And data shows that this is because, on the one hand, we have a conventional way of thinking. The majority of adults on planet Earth today, we have data showing that, comes from a conventional way of thinking about the world and giving meaning from that place. So there's a gap between our way of thinking and the complexity of the problems that we're facing. Okay, so this is not just theoretical. This is not about intelligence. It's not about experience or expertise. And we see also very heavy impact of this gap between mindset and the complexity of the challenge in what we call a leadership crisis. I want to give you just 4 pieces of stats. I have tons more, but I find these the most interesting, you could say. Get this. Only 18% of organizations say that their leaders are very effective at meeting business goals. 18%. 71% of organizations do not feel their leaders today are able to lead them into the future. Fourth, 3 out of 4 employees report that their boss is the most stressful part of their job. And 65% of employees say they would take a new boss over taking a pay raise. I mean, is this a leadership crisis or what? And we have this data out there, and I don't know what happens to you when you think of yourself as being a leader, and does this actually speak about me? I mean, that's a tendency for all of us to say, well, I'm not so sure that that's concerning me, and that it's a collective phenomenon for sure. But this is what we're facing, and it's not getting better, and it's costing us a lot of money in the US and worldwide. So I also want to point you to some typical behaviors that we see with clients over the last, I would say, decade, definitely between me and my colleague David. We have come up with these 3 typical behaviors you could also say are mistakes when it comes to dealing effectively with complexity. The mistake number 1 is that instead of recognizing that uncertainty today is actually very, very normal and must be approached with a stance of curiosity and inquiry, asking questions, listening from not knowing, leaders still believe that what is uncertain is potentially threatening and must be approached with caution. So that costs a lot of time, of course, and energy if we approach it that way. Second mistake, instead of understanding that control is a myth, and it actually does more harm than good, especially when it comes to retention and engagement, many executives, and especially as a default under stress, executives still believe they must maintain control at all costs, and therefore prefer to do everything themselves, for example. I mean, just some keywords are bottleneck and micromanaging. And the third mistake is, instead of focusing on a few key coordinated strategies that we need to identify to achieve a maximum impact in the face of complexity, leaders often under stress respond with actionism. That means, doing as much as they can, as fast as they can. And this outdated behavior, it leads or it leaves leaders ineffective and burned out, and are often perceived as pretty much out of touch. I want to go to one more major mistake, and would then also like to introduce a framework that maybe some of you are familiar with. So what is that mistake? In complex environments, which we can say that most leaders today, and I don't say managers, I see leaders, most leaders today, like most of what you deal with is complex. We can say that more or less. So in complex environments, they tend to misdiagnose the nature of the very problem that they're facing. So in order to look at that a little bit deeper, I would like to introduce the framework called the Kinevin Framework by Dave Snowden. I would just love to maybe get some responses of those who are familiar with the Kinevin Framework, so I know what I'm talking into. Who is familiar with the Kinevin Framework? And if not, that's fine too, of course. So this has been around for a while, and it's very well documented and researched in terms of complexity theory and research. So we can take a look when we, for example, need to make a decision. We really need to take a moment, step back, and have an idea of what are the domains, the four main domains where the challenge that I'm facing could actually be located in. So before doing anything, you want to identify the fundamental nature, and this framework helps us navigate and differentiate these different domains. So you want to figure out, is the problem that you're facing and trying to solve and make a decision on, is it clear? Is it complicated? Is it complex? Or is it chaotic? And so I just want to give a very, very brief overview so that you have a feeling for what this actually means. So let's say the challenge is you want to start a car, right? This is in the context, automobile. You want to start a car. You have best practice, which is you have a simple problem. You want to start the car, and there's one solution to it. There's a standard answer, and you need to find the right one key. You respond to it, and that's it. So when you look at some challenges or some processes in your organization, there are some very simple and predictable challenges that you know the one right answer to, and you just do that, right? There is one click, boom, the email goes out to the client, and that's it. So when we go on the upper right to the complicated realm, then we see that's already a little bit different. There's also a predictable and known answer or solution, you could say, but it's not available to just anyone. It takes an expert. So maybe you as the leader, you have this expertise, but maybe you don't. And again, in the realm of the automobile, this would be you are on the highway and the car breaks down. Guess what? You not being the expert, you call the mechanic, they look under the hood, they see immediately what's wrong, they fix it for you, and off you go. So that's a predictable challenge, and yet it takes expertise, often also analysis, which can also lead to some problems, but that's something for later. So now we go to complex. Now again, automobile, you're on the highway and you find yourself in a traffic jam. That is a complex situation to find yourself in because there are a multitude of different factors that led to this outcome. And for you to now call an expert and say, analyze for me why this traffic jam came into being and what I need to do about it would not be the appropriate response. So what you need to do is something quite different. So this is an unpredictable challenge, and what you need to do is to act. You don't analyze and therefore don't paralyze maybe, but you actually act. And there are no, let's say, cause and effect relationships to be found here either. So don't even start looking for them. You need to move. You design something that we call safe to fail experiment, and then you learn as you go. It's a very different stance to approach. So it's about what you know from Agile, maybe, it's more experimental. So that's what we do. And so in the chaotic realm, again, if we are on the road, we're in a traffic jam. Now the next thing you know is you hear over the radio that a tornado is about to hit you and you need to get out. That's the first thing that you do and nothing else. Okay, so the challenge here is, and that's why I have the red arrow there, is that often we don't take the time to really distinguish a complicated problem from a complex one. And why is that? I want to say that it's not just about, let's say, you've never heard about the distinction between complicated and complex. It also has to do with our mind. So again, this gap between the complexity challenge and also how our mind tends to respond. If we recognize it, that's one thing, but then we also need to have a frame of mind that is capable of experimentation. So these are the four that I wanted to point out. And as you looked at the framework, I would just love for you to take a moment, and feel free to ask any more questions about the framework. What's your greatest business challenge right now? And I would like for you to write maybe even as many as come to mind into the chat right now. And the second question is, how does the distinction between complicated and complex, as you just heard it from me, how does that perhaps shift the way you think about maybe one of those challenges? What's the impact? So what's your greatest business challenge right now? Please type it into the chat. And how does knowing about the distinction between complicated and complex shift your way of thinking about that challenge?
Hey, Marion, we've got a question in the chat. Can we pop back to the last slide and look at the diagram again?
Sure. Thank you.
Fonzie. And while people are thinking about that, I would also like to ask a question that came up in the chat earlier. So you guys think about kind of what you're struggling with in business right now, or what you guys are facing. And I'd love to know what, somebody had asked if they could have copies of the slides after the presentation.
Sure, yeah.
Great, perfect. All right, so business development, let's see here. Tight timelines and limited resources. Oh my goodness, absolutely. I apologize. Our lawn guys come once every 3 weeks, and right now is when they're here. So I apologize for the background noise. Of course, that happened. Hiring and retaining talent. Oh my gosh, absolutely, Jacqueline. I know so many of us are struggling with that right now. The tie between finding recruiting and retaining great employees and organic growth in net sales. Yeah, absolutely. So hard to grow when you can't find the right talent. I know my own business has been struggling with that a little bit, and just, you know, that fine line between excellent service delivery and the right staff to deliver it, and sales are all intermixed. Demand value for your key product line is diminished. Oh, interesting, Sarah. I wonder why that is. I guess we can talk about what's causing that, or whether it's complex or chaotic problem. Getting the right talent for shifts in your business. Oh yeah. Long neglect, problem solving in a resource constrained environment. Sherry, okay, interesting. All right, so it looks like, oh, prioritization, absolutely. Habit of everything is urgent and important. Yep, so it looks like Cindy and Jacqueline, you guys could commiserate over that. Looks like you're both struggling with it right now. Thinking strategically beyond a year or two, so alignment, multiple focuses is understood, absolutely. So it looks like you guys have a lot of things going on, and that so much makes sense. And these are all, kind of fall into chaotic, complex, complicated. There's no simple answers here.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe raise also one question. How many times have you sat in a meeting and you were pretty sure that this was a challenge and not one where you can come up with, this is the answer and I know it, and you bring it up and there's at least one person in the room that says, well, that's easy, I know how to do it. I did that 30 times, in my 30-year career. I know how to do because I've done it. And you just sense that that is not what's going to help move things forward in a way that leads to innovation. So that's something that we often experience, right? That somebody in the room believes that this is a problem that can be fixed and solved with one good practice. So that's an expert with a lot of experience. And then something halts because there are no more questions than maybe in the room, and only people who have a strong respect for somebody who's senior in the room. And then we jump on maybe the one solution, and we don't want to hurt that person. And you realize the energy drops and that nothing new will probably come from the discussion. So this can bring the awareness to say, okay, how can I bring into the conversation the idea of, let's figure out the fundamental nature of the challenge that we're facing here, and what if this were a complex one? Well, then we should not even gather more data. Then we should not even come from the default of wanting to analyze and thinking that there is one solution. But actually, what we're looking for is something that is constantly on the move as we are looking at it. It's constantly moving. Okay, Deborah, you think it's good for me to continue?
Yep, I think we could definitely move along.
Okay. So I just want you guys to keep your challenge in mind as you listen to the information that you get from me, right? So that you really apply it to something that is relevant to you. Okay. So the question that I, my colleagues and my business partner, we're all of us, we can ask ourselves, so what do we do if this is true, what Marion says, and that there is a gap between this mind, this conventional mind, and I will speak more about what that means because it's not traditional or conservative. Conventional means something quite different. What do we do to increase our mental complexity? Is that even possible? And how do we match it to the complexity of the challenge that we're facing? So I wonder if you have any ideas that pop to mind. Just think of what you have tried to do. Maybe you've had ideas of asking good questions of yourself, coaching yourself, coaching others. Expand your mind, a different perspective on the same topic. So we have done a lot of research and we have applied this to a lot of leaders, executive leadership teams actually, and also some of them have started to cascade it into their organization, a certain framework. And one big distinction, very helpful to make when you want to answer and approach that question, how do we grow mental complexity, is to make a distinction between two dimensions. So on the left here, you see this glass and you can imagine that's you. Right? And you have content to fill, and that would be skills, your knowledge, information, your expertise, all these things that you fill in and you grow the content as you go. And we would call that the horizontal growth, the horizontal increase of your expertise, you could say. Now, on the other side, we have this bigger glass. So we can actually say, is there a bigger container possible? Is there more capacity possible? And we say that is, like I said, capacity. So it's not skills, and it is vertical development. So we want to distinguish, on the one hand, you have a container that stays the same, the form stays the same. And then we have a transformation where the form changes and increases its capacity. And here is where I like to bring in this wonderful quote. It's not just what you know, so your skills, let's say you learned about agile or coaching or whatnot, it's how you know what you know. So we need both. And I don't know if you can agree with me, my experience is that we have, especially in the West, a great focus on building skills, and we have somehow neglected to also increase the capacity, so how we know what we know. Okay, so this meaning making, this increasing your capacity, we also call it meaning making. I'll talk about it in a while more. This is something that evolves over time. And I would like to go into the theory of that a little bit deeper, because that is, in my experience, very little talked about. And it's booming right now, but it's still too slow if we really want to stand a chance to solve the complex problems of our time. And I don't mean just business, I mean climate change and many, many more. Okay, so you can see these Russian dolls, and you can see something that is supposed to illustrate the developmental stages that all human beings go through. And actually, somebody called Piaget in the 60s and 70s of the previous century, he made great discoveries about how children grow through these stages. They literally go through qualitatively different stages of meaning making. And meaning making means how you give meaning to the world, like the world, period, and yourself in it. So the same holds actually true for adults. It never stops, but that's a piece of information that somehow we were never taught, and also not taught in business schools, to my knowledge, in most business schools. So there's a stage of development as a human being that you're at as a leader today, and there are probably many, many more than you can imagine ahead of you. And the only challenge or problem here is that as children, we get very much supported in our growth. So the child that needs to go from crawling to standing and then walking constantly gets cheered on by its environment. Guess what? In society, especially in Western society, that's what I'm focusing on, that stops at a certain developmental age. And so there seems to be a stagnation, or what I call a vertical ceiling. The stages, this is a very simplified way of illustrating it, just 3 of the main developmental stages or plateaus, as you can see. I took the labels out because I would like to go deeper in the next slide. So you see 3 plateaus, and we actually go from something that is on the lower left, the first plateau called socialized mind. That's the first, you would say, least mature adult form of mind, typically a good, member of society, somebody who knows how to navigate life by pleasing others mostly. And this is a wonderful person to have on your team. Let me say that, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just not really helpful when it comes to leadership. And because this form of mind, the socialized mind, is very much written by its environment and has a really hard time initiating and feeling confident to have constructive conflicts. The second plateau is what we call the self-authoring. So now we have moved towards, or away from my life is being authored by others and by what others expect from me and think of me, and I need to please them and cater to that. Now I become an individual. I individuate, and I can separate myself from others and be confident and have a strong inner voice. I am the author of my own life. And let me tell you, this is one of the most and well-researched area. There's tons of data. If anybody of you is interested, I'm very happy to share more about this. So this is the typical stage that leaders are at today. And we actually can see that this is not quite enough when it comes to complexity. We need to go to the next level, and that is the redefining and transforming form of mind. And when you look at the lower line that goes reactive, creative, and generative, that means how well are you at each stage able to manage your own impulses and emotions. And this is something that increases the ability to manage your own emotions and really channel them to be a real contribution and not something that closes you up or confronts and attacks others. Then this is something to go for, the adult vertical development. This is a more detailed map, and I will guide you through it. Identity development oscillates between 2 poles, you could say. You could see on the left, it's the I, so the focus is on I, or ego, you could say, and this is, I have a strong voice. So the typical leader today says, I have a strong voice, I have a strong conviction and set of values, I have a lot of experience and confidence, please follow me. I know where we're going, trust me. And on the other hand, we go also to more the community and the collective, and then we become more of a participative leader. I want to walk you through these stages, and I'll again do this quite fast. I can look at the time, it's advancing.
Yeah, so, I was gonna say, right before you get started, I forgot to tell you, half hour.
yeah, thank you. So, and I am taking the time intentionally to stick with this one, even though it is quite in detail, because this is, it's so new, and we need to kind of keep that in mind, not just for ourselves, but to be able to do something that I call transducing and communicating across different action logics. So if you find yourself ever frustrated because there are people in your team that always go into nitty-gritty detail and they can never really look at the big picture, well, guess what? It's not because they don't want to, it's because they don't bring the capacity yet. So to recognize that and then to know how to respond to it in the most developmental way, that's what this is hoping to do. So there are 3 levels here as well. We have the pre-conventional, conventional, and the post-conventional. The pre-conventional, very, very quick, is this opportunist that has not really found good reasons to follow rules and constantly is looking for ways to avoid them and being caught. might be the main reason for an opportunist to say, okay, I will follow the rules, but as soon as you're not looking, I'm going to look for some loophole to do it otherwise. And the motif here is to get the most I can get, regardless of others. So it seems pretty ruthless, but from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. The next one is the Diplomat. I already spoke about that one. That one is the first conventional one. It's the one that accepts the rules and is kind of also the social glue in your team. They know all the birthdays. They make everyone laugh, and it's a good atmosphere. But they try to please everyone, and they are an outside in person, we say. They have internalized other people's voices as their own. So they may go into one meeting in the morning, and they are all excited about that project, and then they go to another meeting half an hour later and they say yes to that project, and then everybody shakes their head because those projects are diametrically opposed and really get in each other's way, and they're like, doesn't she or he notice? But that's the result of a pleasing form of mind. So on our way of individuation, we go through the expert. So this one tries to be as competent as possible, very objective, looking for statistics and data. And this can drive people crazy because they slow things down and they're not very open to feedback. They will listen to you if you're at least an expert as far as they are, but they get you into analysis paralysis, right? Because that's what they know how to do. And that's a great way on our developmental journey, but we need to transcend and include this stage to be where the most leaders today actually are around here. The achiever, you make it in society and out again in Western society and in business, mostly when you know how to be effective. You know how to achieve goals and empower others. And here you are for the first time open to feedback. This is the last conventional stage. And post-conventional means now you go to a place where often in organizations, this is seen as weak, and people say, well, can't you be more like you were before? I knew kind of the direction because you told me. But now the redefining mindset questions and really values a lot of different perspectives. That's the servant leadership. That's the participative leadership style. That's where you become more of a listener and asking questions. And guess what? It's a more feminine way of leading, we can say too. It seems to be easier for women often to go towards this style, but you need courage and you need some allies in the organization. But like I said, if you are known, or if your culture and context rewards and fosters strong achieving leaders that know where to go, then the one that asks and questions and listens is often mistaken as weak. And we know that this is actually not true, but that this is on the path to becoming an even more post-conventional, transforming leader that actually becomes more of a vessel, you could say, and as a catalyst that really is focused on transforming oneself and others. So people, when they are around you, they can tell that this is your main motif, and it's very, very infectious. Okay, so in the end, we have two journeys. And that's also where the brand Second Freedom comes from. The first journey is about becoming free from what other people think and expect of you, to become that achieving and very solid inside out kind of leader, a strong inner voice. And now the journey that we're asking leaders to go on, and we need that in order to be effective in the face of complexity, is to how do you become free of yourself? So that means also managing your ego, and most of all, really knowing what is it that you tend to be attached to, what do you identify with, and then realize that's just one perspective of many. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I would like for us to just go briefly into how does this maybe apply to you and your challenges. And I just put up a few here that are often the typical ones today, of course, talent retention, war of talent. We've seen that, collaboration, communication with the team, with the board. How do you actually influence and move others to action? Any imposter syndrome? And the last one is, Deborah, that you gave me that wonderful idea of, the challenge. And I can say I've been experiencing that a lot lately. So I'm in a group, and maybe not the only woman in the room, but maybe I am. And then I have an idea and I share it, and there's not much response. And then half a minute later, a man says pretty much the same thing and gets, all the rewards and gets all the attention, like what I said was never said. And I would like to see if that is something that you connect with, and then maybe go through the stages and say, well, how do we typically respond? And this may help you actually place yourself on this developmental map, and also maybe place some of your team members that you can think of on the developmental map. So when we look on the map, and the idea is, I just said something, not much response, and then just with a few different words, the man in the room gets all the attention. And I must say that I recognize in myself that I have that same bias. I actually also catch myself placing more attention sometimes and credibility to the male voice in the room when it comes with a deep voice, and it's very, very convincing. And I catch myself how I do the same thing. So I would like to start with the diplomat. How would a diplomat leader, if you imagine that that's where you're operating from as a default mode, you're the one that's in the room and you're like, ooh, I don't want to bring this up, they're going to think that I'm, again, like this feminist, it's going to be difficult. And then these people that I lead, that I need to be behind me, that's going to be difficult. So I better not rock the boat. So is that something that some of you can relate to, that's an impulse that you sometimes have to stay away from conflict and irritation for the sake of harmony? So I would love to hear a couple of voices so I know you're there.
We have quite an active chat, actually. People are doing great over here.
Oh, good. I'm
yeah.
not looking in there because that's too much for my attention.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's why I'm following it along too. Yeah, no, lots of great chat here. So just kind of, I think everyone resonated with the, being in the room and having a man say exactly what you just said, and everyone being like, oh, great idea.
Yeah. And that's so frustrating. I mean, and like I said, I find it so frustrating because I see it in myself. I do the same thing, even with my business partner. I mean, and he's even aware of it, but we still both fall into the trap. I can't tell you. It's quite amazing. So yeah, it's very helpful I find, to be aware of this map and say, okay, I have gone through this stage. This is not my default stage, but when under stress, I may fall back to this diplomat, this pleasing form of mind. And when you recognize that, you can make a different choice and say, hey, come on, what would the expert do here? Maybe I need to bring my expert in here and say, listen, I have data, okay? And then you get the attention because people really react well and respond well to experts in your organization. Or you make the conscious choice to say, I'm going to be the achiever here and I'm going to lead this conversation because after all, it's my topic, and it is something that I have been working on with my team and you're going to really just take command of the room and be open to feedback, of course. At the same time, you're not going to shy away from leading the conversation, right? And setting the tone. And if you want to take it a step further, this may be something for you to grow into, is to say, okay, I may be pretty irritated here. And I may be irritated not just about, let's say, what's going on in the room around me. I'm also irritated and frustrated with myself because my first reaction was to please. And now I need to step away from my irritation. I also need to step away from my lack of confidence or an imposter syndrome, because that's all identification. And now I'm just going to open my mind and I'm going to ask questions that lead us to what we are all experiencing as something mind-opening and forwarding in the interest of the organization and the project. So it's not about me and it's not about them. That's not what this is about. This is a bunch of people that is doing something less skillful than I am appreciating, and I want to move us further. And I will place my attention there and bring something in the room in the form of a question, let's say, or an example and a metaphor. And we will all shift to something that is more in favor of what we're trying to do here. And if you continue that journey, and you have an idea, and this is what I'm recommending, you have an idea of what those later stage action logics actually do, those high performing leaders that are true transformists, you could call them, then you could borrow some of that that behavior and what they do and what they tend to bring into the conversation. And you can just experiment with that. But make a conscious choice and realize that asking questions and listening is actually a more mature way of dealing with a situation like that. It's not weak, it's strong. So that's what I'm trying to also convey with this developmental map.
I'd like to hop in at this perfect stopping point and say we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'd love to leave at least 10 minutes for question and answer. So I know you've got a few more things to cover, but I thought I'd hop in here.
Yes, thank you.
So I will make a comment or ask a question.
Of course, yes, thank you.
So for your last statement, I agree. I think one thing that's challenging though, and I feel like that's my approach typically, is to listen and ask questions. But when you're in a room with very dominating personalities, it's hard to then feel like you're being shut out of the conversation when you want to give people time to talk. So how would you suggest handling that type of a scenario?
Hi,
Yeah.
Julia. Hold on, let me get on mute.
And who just asked the question? I couldn't.
This is Danae.
Danae.
Thank you for the question. Fantastic. That's a big challenge, and I guess we all have experienced that. So I would say the first thing is what I call self-connect, or self-empathy or self-compassion that you can practice as a muscle, so that you don't get stuck in judging the other or whatever, which really constricts our creativity and responsiveness. So it's about, okay, I feel this person is dominating and that I'm overwhelmed right now. And just acknowledging that is something that relaxes something in our system and in our brain to come back to the present moment and not get stuck in that. So, and the second thing is for me to realize, where is this other person coming from in terms of, and I'm really doing this actually more and more often, that I can listen behind the words of the statement and behavior of the other person to say, I believe this person is making meaning and putting focus on facts and is an expert, and that's what's hard for me to deal with. And then I need to recognize that. So the second thing after self-compassion and self-connect for me is, where is the other person coming from? How do they make meaning of the world? And I need to also know, where do I typically make meaning of the world from? And what's the typical dynamic between these two? And there's a lot I can say about, between the expert and the achiever, which most of my clients are really struggling with. One wants to see the bigger picture and the other one always gets lost in the detail. So you want to really get a sense of where the other's coming from. It doesn't have to be right, but you want to be open to that. And then meet the person where they are at. That's one way. If you were to have somebody in the room that's actually an opportunist, like the one on the bottom here, then we can say clearly this person needs to be interrupted and needs to hear and experience you as the alpha in the room, period. There's no discussion, there's no listening. That's not what we need with an opportunist. You need to be the alpha in the room that says, listen, this will have consequences. You either follow or you don't. This is me calling the shots. So knowing the developmental map will help you navigate the situation, give you the confidence to choose the response to come from that is appropriate for you and for where the other person is coming from. I don't know, is that helpful?
It is, thank you.
Okay, and I just gave a few, there's a lot of the dynamics between all of the action logics, as we call them. But especially the one that I just said, when you're in the face of an opportunist and coming from your default understanding and letting them speak and never interrupting them and being so fair and everyone is equal is exactly not what to do, okay? So this awareness lets you also step away from your comfort zone, because that may be where you feel comfortable, but then you are applying that because it works for you and not because it works for the other. Okay. I'm going to move on. Distribution among leaders. So this is something that we see that still, when we look at and this is again, this comes from diagnostic instruments that have been applied to thousands and thousands of managers globally and leaders in organizations from all different industries. So we can still say, and this is changing, of course, over the time, but still the relativity is still correct. 13%, fairly large still. The greatest operate from achiever mindset. We already have a few redefining, the first post-conventional form of mind that is able to actually question the system and not just act within what society is holding as the paradigm and the status quo. And where we actually need to go is actually the transforming form of mind. There is data. If you are out there initiating and then implementing transformational programs, the amount of transformations and the effectiveness of the implementation increases significantly for transforming form of minds in CEOs. Okay, I would just like to give you a moment from what you've understood, and I know that this is still scratching the surface, but just your sense. Where would you place yourself? What's your default action logic? And we can say the expert, details. Oh, I see that. We don't see the words, it has flipped. So it's the expert, the achiever, the redefining and transforming, as you saw in the previous slide. So is it for you about I have to please, or is it I have to be objective, or is it I have to get things done and close to a burnout? Or redefining, which is the motif of I value everyone's perspective and I listen and listen, or I transform myself and others. Just make a guess for yourself. And thinking about maybe somebody in your team that you find either very, very easy to collaborate and work with, or rather hard and challenging to work with. Where would you place them? What's that dynamic?
Sorry, can you go back to that last slide so we can just look at it while you think?
Yeah.
All right, so we have a lot of different things here. So redefining, but sometimes going to achieving after extended periods of stress. Karen, you and I could commiserate on this. I am right there with you. And Marion's constantly trying to get me back out of achieving and into redefining so that I don't get stuck in the do things trap. Redefining, achiever redefining. I think it was Sydney said, it depends on what's going on, and I agree with you there. I, in my own life, realized that, as a business owner, I work in one action logic, and as a daughter, I work in a totally different one, and that's not helpful. All right, might be based on the situation, redefining, working on this. So this is great. Lots of answers here.
Wonderful. Okay, so I hope to get you going in the thinking and reflecting. Okay, so what does that mean? And I'm going to have to move much faster, or actually jump a few things. I
You
realize
want to
I've
skip
taken more
ahead,
time.
yeah. Let's probably, this is probably a good point to stop. And you know what, pop in the chat if you guys want to have a further conversation with Marion, because she could talk about this all day. Let me know in the chat, and I can host another more of a informal Q&A if there's other things we really want to dig into, because I know we won't have a ton of time for Q&A today. Okay, perfect. Definitely doing one. Sorry, Marion. I volunteered you to do another call. Perfect. Okay.
So I'm wondering, Deborah, for the offer, should I just jump to there so that we have it out there? Is that a good idea?
We're going to talk about the offer, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A until the end of the session. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So I hope you guys can see it. So how can you leverage this advantage? And I just want to give you a very brief one. So my recommendation, and this is just, I'm like I said, this is the juice I've been swimming in for the last 12 years. Really, to these two dimensions. you can really work on your Vuca skills. So if we say you have a certain form of mind, and then there are all sorts of skills to focus on, we can say that, with the help of the Lectica Institute that is associated with Harvard University, we focus on Vuca skills, and they are the mega skills that are called analytical reasoning, perspective coordination, collaborative capacity, contextual thinking, and decision making. Have a broad range of decision making tools in your portfolio and build that for yourself and with your team. So that's what we focus on, right? We know which skills specifically in the 21st century are relevant to be able to be effective in the face of complexity. So assess that, build those, okay? This is what you would get if you were to get an assessment. So you would get your scores on how clear is your thinking and how do you communicate clearly, what's the score on that, and then on the mega skills that I just mentioned. So those are the skills. Second, and this is actually I would say the foundation of everything, because one thing is to know what you know, but then again, like I said, how you know what you know. How do you employ those Vuca skills? That's where it all starts, right? So grow your mental capacity so we can assess it. And what you need actually is a baseline. So for either of those, you really need a baseline, and that's my offer to you. So I was thinking, what can I give to the chief community? Really as something that I love giving because I love the work and I believe in it. I've applied it to myself, really, for a long time now, and it's really helping me grow and make courageous choices like leaving my country, making a decision and making it work and being really happy about it. So I'm offering you this. You can do a debrief session. It's either 1 or 2 sessions, depending on which one you choose. And I will offer you for free as a master certified coach, a debrief session with me. Like I said, maybe 1, maybe 2 sessions, depending on how many questions you have and how curious you are. So that's what I'm offering you. Either you want to focus on assessing and building your Vuca skills, and that's based on something called Lectica LDMA, Leadership Decision Making Assessment. So you would get very much clarity on those mega skills and how to work on them. You would then work on a very specific one, and I give you the learning technology for that. Or you choose to really assess yourself in terms of, how do I give meaning to the world? Where am I stuck? What are my growth edges? How can I make myself grow into the next stage of meaning making to be more effective? So that would then be the Global Leadership Profile, GLP, by Global Leadership Associates. So last sentence, I'm offering you the free debrief with me. You would have to buy it from the provider through me because I'm a certified coach for either of them. You would pay just for the costs by the provider, and you get it for free.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Marion. There was a quick question of what the difference between the two tests are.
Yeah, one is about the skills, right? The very specific Vuca skills. Actually, those skills were identified after 9/11. Because what we found is it's a lack of imagination, and we needed to find out what exactly do human beings need to focus on in the 21st century, and this is the result. The Lectical decision-making assessment is the answer to that question. How come that was possible to happen? So that's Lectica. You can research that. It's a very valid assessment tool. The second one is the Global Leadership Profile, and it measures your action logic. So it actually measures the capacity, your mental complexity. We will find out, where do you operate from as a default? Are you a pleaser? Are you an achiever? Where are you? Where do you need to grow into if you want to? What are your strengths where you are and you're not even aware of them? And where do you tend to fall back to when you're under pressure and stress? And I will help you understand where you are at and how you can grow.
And I will say I did that, and it was incredibly helpful. And it was kind of the basis for everything we did after that together over the last year. But it was really interesting, and it helped me a lot to understand how I make meaning of the world. So just throw that out there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. I know we've come to the end of the hour, and we have so much fun information to cover that we didn't get to Q&A, but that's okay because
Yeah.
it does look like there's interest to do a second one that's just Q&A, and so I would like to do that. For everyone on the call, I will schedule something with Marion and put the meetup out there, and I'll let you know here in the next couple weeks when we get that scheduled for, and then. Feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn. I put our information in the chat. Oh, and Marion did too. Thank you.
I did, yeah. Thank you. And just feel free, no obligation, no strings attached. If you're curious about this, I'd love to have a conversation. And I call it generative interview as well. So that could mean just a 15-minute chat to get some insights in where are you stuck right now, yourself and or with your team.
Perfect. And if anyone wants a copy of this program or the slides, let us know and we'll be happy to share it. Reach out to either one of us. Probably Marion. I'll share the copy with her, the recording.
Mhm.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. All right, I'm going to stay on for a minute because a couple people are messaging about wanting recordings. So I'll stay on till everyone's gone.
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. Thanks, guys. So good meeting everyone. Oh, I'll stop the